Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this call. We're going to be talking about what only PanCAN is doing in pancreatic cancer. And it's my pleasure to introduce Julie Fleshman, President and CEO of the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, fondly referred to as PanCAN. Julie is also the chair of the World Pancreatic Cancer Coalition. There's much I could say, but to quote the LA Business Journal, which recently named Julie 2021 Nonprofit Executive of the Year, Julie lost her father to pancreatic cancer in 1999 and has made it her mission to change the course of the disease and improve patient outcomes. Julie started with PanCAN in 2000 as the first full-time staff member and executive director. In the past 20 years under her leadership, PanCAN has grown from an organization of one with $228,000 in revenue to an annual budget of more than $40 million with 150 employees. Her journey, which began to honor her father, has evolved into a passionate and rewarding career, allowing her to help pancreatic cancer patients live longer and healthier lives. It's my pleasure to introduce and turn this over to Julie.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny. I appreciate your nice comments. And good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, everyone. It's so great to be with you today. Thank you for joining us. You're here because you share our same commitment and approach to fighting pancreatic cancer on all fronts. Everything that we do at PanCAN is possible because of you. So I'm really excited today to share with you some of the things that are going on because of you, and also talk to you about why PanCAN's approach is unique and why we're doing things that no one else in the field is doing or can do. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We want this to be a conversation, so please do turn off your cameras so that we can see one another. I'd love to see all of your faces. Everyone is on mute, so you can use the chat function to put any questions that you have along throughout our presentation, and we will try to get to all of your questions at the end of the program. We're also recording this meeting, and so you'll get a link after the meeting to the recording if you're interested in hearing it again, or if you'd like to pass it on to others. If you need anything while we are here together, Kaylee here on the screen can help you. Please write down her email address, kmalon@pancan.org. And if you have any troubles, you can email Kaylee at any time and she'll get right back to you. All right, so let's get started. So to help me explain PanCAN's unique approach, I've invited one of our esteemed thought leaders in the field, Dr. Stephen Leach. And so it's my pleasure to introduce him to you today. Dr. Leach is a renowned pancreatic cancer surgeon and researcher. He currently serves as the director of the Dartmouth Norris Cotton Cancer Center and the Preston T. and Virginia R. Kesley Distinguished Chair in Cancer. He has mentored countless young researchers and clinicians, including several recipients of PanCAN Early Research Career Development Awards. Steve is a former chair of PanCAN's Scientific and Medical Advisory Board and currently continues to serve on our advisory board and has for many, many years. Prior to joining the Dartmouth Norris Cotton Cancer Center, Steve served in leadership roles at both Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Dr. Leach, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Julie. So happy to be here. And good morning and hello to everyone from across the country.
Great. So before we get started, I want to just remind everyone, do a little refresher on our vision and PanCAN's unique approach. PanCAN's vision is to create a world in which all patients with pancreatic cancer will thrive. And we're approaching that every day through bold actions, funding research and clinical initiatives, advocating in Washington, D.C. for increased federal resources for the disease, providing comprehensive patient services so patients and families can make informed decisions, and working with our amazing volunteer network around the country to raise awareness and funds for our mission. In addition to making all this happen, we partner with top institutions across the country to accelerate new treatment options for patients, early detection strategies, and advancements in the field. But what most of our donors don't know is that we're doing some things that no one institution is doing or can do. And so I'm delighted to have this conversation with Dr. Leach to share with you some of that information. So Dr. Leach, before we get started, let's just a little bit about you. Why did you decide to focus your career on pancreatic cancer?
Well, as I'm a surgical oncologist, and as a cancer surgeon who specialized in this disease, Julie, I witnessed really firsthand and was initially just inspired by the unique courage of patients who were facing the difficult diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, and often at a time that I've now come to personally consider the prime of life, during their 60s and 70s, when they should be walking their children down the aisle, meeting their grandchildren, and enjoying life. And as a surgeon scientist, I was also attracted to the opportunity to tackle a particularly vexing scientific problem. And then, frankly, I was also inspired by the opportunities brought by PanCAN to interact not only with scientific colleagues from around the world, but with patients, survivors, caregivers, advocates, to be part of the amazing community that PanCAN was building.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it really is true. The patients inspire all of us every single day. So while we certainly have a lot of work still to do, the field really has transformed over the last 20 years. Can you talk about, what's different today than it was 20 years ago?
Yes. 20 years ago, there was no real pancreatic cancer research community. So I remember one of the very first meetings that PanCAN convened, and it was just a small number of individual clinicians and researchers who focused on the disease, but we'd largely never met, and we'd certainly never collaborated. And so among the many things that only PanCAN has been able to do, I think building the community for progress is among the most impactful, and that through PanCAN, our pancreatic cancer research community is without a doubt the most unified, collaborative, and collegial disease-specific research community in all of cancer research. And bringing together this community is not something that any single institution could have done. It took PanCAN to bring together a community that's now the envy of everyone in cancer research.
Yeah, no, that's really true. We hear so much about some of the competitiveness that happens in other fields, and I agree with you that the pancreatic cancer field is really unique. It's such a hard disease, and nobody can do this by themselves, and so we need each other to accelerate progress.
Right.
So one of the first things that PanCAN had to tackle in the early days was growing the field. There were no researchers focused on pancreatic cancer. So one of PanCAN's early areas of focus was to fund junior investigators to encourage them to make studying pancreatic cancer their career focus. So can you talk a little bit about why was funding junior investigators an important strategy, certainly in the early days, to grow the field, but why does it still remain an important strategy today?
Yeah, well, this is one of the many things. I just look back on your early leadership of PanCAN, and I literally think it was genius. And I've asked you many times, how did you know that this was the way to do things? But you did. And PanCAN focused on funding initially junior investigators, while other organizations, and certainly the National Institutes of Health, have biased their support towards senior established investigators. But this was just a stroke of genius, because it created the next generation of clinicians and researchers focused on this disease, and brought people in a way that allowed them to be emotionally engaged and basically dedicate their life's work to the disease. And it was certainly the funding, but it was also the opportunities for mentorship and for being part of the larger community that PanCAN convened that became really powerful tools to recruit young scientists who might have been rather undifferentiated and recruit them to this cause and inspire them to focus their efforts on pancreatic cancer. And as an increasingly senior member of this community, it's now great to see that not just the next generation, but the generation that follows now recruited by those initial young faculty that PanCAN supported.
Yeah, no, it really, and there's so many amazing stories if you track back to people we've funded over the years, and we got people to drink the purple Kool-Aid, and they've really stayed in the field. So let's talk about two examples, that two junior investigators in your lab that actually received PanCAN Career Development Awards, both for Florencia McAllister and Jennifer Bailey, two fantastic women. Talk about why those grants were important to them and how they're both doing today.
Yes, well, they were both brilliant postdoctoral research fellows that I had the privilege to work with, mentor, and train, who were lucky enough to be invited to join the Community for Progress, lucky enough to be supported through Career Development Awards from PanCAN. And simply put, this allowed them to be bold. It allowed them to be creative and innovative, now confident that they were supported by PanCAN, that they were going to be mentored, not just by me, but by a whole community. And it allowed them to take risks. And now as an associate tenured professor at MD Anderson for Florencia and an assistant professor at the University of Texas for Jennifer, their labs have gone on to far succeed what they did in the Leach lab, with a huge multiplication effect. They've probably already realized a tenfold return on investments that PanCAN initially made in terms of now additional NIH funding. And their ability to be bold and take risks have allowed them to make discoveries that actually transcend pancreatic cancer and are also impacting cancer research more broadly. Using pancreatic cancer and using their devotion to further knowledge in pancreatic cancer, they've created fundamental new knowledge about how the microbiome, the bacteria in our GI tract and elsewhere influence pancreatic cancer, and just kind of seminal discoveries. So by being supported by PanCAN early on, it emboldened them to take risks that traditional funding mechanisms typically don't allow.
Yeah, great. And it really is amazing. I've visited both of their labs, and it's not just them anymore. Now they have a whole lab of people all studying pancreatic cancer. So it really is a multiplying effect. So you've talked a bit, Dr. Leach, about the community, PanCAN's Community for Progress. So that's, us not just giving funding to our grantees, but also bringing them together for meetings and collaboration. So why is this important, and what would collaboration in the pancreatic cancer research field look like without PanCAN?
Well, frankly, I think it would be like a lot of other areas of cancer research where scientific research teams and academic institutions are, unfortunately, sometimes more competitive than collaborative. We just have a community that transcends, traditional competition and truly is dedicated to collaboratively moving the ball forward. And that's, a direct reflection. It's something that only PanCAN could have done.
Yep, great. And it's been amazing this last year to hear from some of the researchers and advisors. Everyone misses being together in person. It really is a true, not just to get together to talk about science, but I think people really truly miss being together right. Because it really, there's true friendships. It's a family that is all trying to fight this difficult disease.
The other side of that is, again, the opportunity to put scientists in touch with patients, survivors, caregivers, that have made all of our work more meaningful, that we used to do in person and look forward to returning to.
Yeah, great. So another important part of building the pancreatic cancer field is increasing resources, of course, for researchers. So besides raising critical dollars privately so that PanCAN can invest in pancreatic cancer research, we also focus on advocating to increase the federal resources that are available to the pancreatic cancer research community. And just to be clear to our audience, because sometimes we get questions about this, PanCAN doesn't receive any of the federal funding that we advocate for. We're just advocating for increased dollars for the pancreatic cancer research community to be able to apply for. So Dr. Leach, can you talk about why PanCAN's efforts to increase the federal resources are important for advancing the field?
Right, sure. So without question, pancreatic cancer research has historically been underfunded by the by the NIH. And before PanCAN started advocating on behalf of our pancreatic cancer patients, the National Cancer Institute distributed 10 to 20 times more funding for breast cancer research, prostate cancer research than for pancreatic cancer. And it's not that we don't want generous support, generous funding for these diseases. It's just that our pancreatic cancer patients deserve equal support. And this has been another huge legacy, an ongoing impact of PanCAN in terms of being very successful for increasing federal funding, year over year for pancreatic cancer. We've seen it grow. And so examples of this are that PanCAN's advocacy efforts in DC were the cause for the Recalcitrant Cancer Research Act that was passed in 2013 that allocated increased funding for pancreatic cancer. And then more recently, PanCAN's advocacy secured the first ever dedicated federal research program for pancreatic cancer through the Department of Defense. And this was initially funded, I think it's $6 million, and it's more than doubled to 15 million now. And so again, this is something that no individual institution, could have achieved. When I go to Capitol Hill on behalf of Dartmouth, I'm like politely greeted mostly by junior congressional staffers half my age. But when our Community for Progress descends as a purple force on Capitol Hill, a force for good, our representatives and senators show up in person, can't help but notice, and again, with really palpable results.
Yeah, no, that's great. And those federal resources really are the foundation for funding labs across the country. I mean, for just to help people understand, without that federal funding, you really can't sustain your labs, regardless of what kind of funding you're getting from your institution.
Right.
Yeah, great. And just for everybody, last week we were in Washington, D.C. virtually. We had our Advocacy Action Week just last week, over 265 virtual meetings with members of Congress were made by our constituents around the country. It was really pretty amazing. And I think we set the pace for organizations like us during this pandemic, and still continuing to meet virtually with our members of Congress. So, Dr. Leach, one of PanCAN's foundational programs is our patient services, of course. We want to ensure that patients know and understand their options so that they can make informed decisions about their care. So can you talk a little bit, why is PanCAN's patient services critical for patients and families, and how does this complement the excellent care patients do receive from their doctors?
Sure. I mean, one of the most inspiring parts about a past visit I made to headquarters in Manhattan Beach was just seeing the armies of people who were there helping patients. And so I'd say that in my role as an NCI Cancer Center director, at least multiple times each week, I'm contacted either by a friend or a friend of a friend who's newly diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and seeking my advice. And young or old, rich or poor, educated or uneducated, I uniformly include in my advice the recommendation for them to reach out to PanCAN's patient services, enroll in Patient Central. And I've just found that folks who do, by having a voice to talk to, a personal voice, kind of a personal GPS to help guide them on their pancreatic cancer journey, having the educational materials, the information about clinical trials, specialists in their area, the Know Your Tumor program, patients simply find this empowering. And so in my experience, PanCAN's patient services help patients and their caregivers restore a vital sense of control of their lives at the very moment when the world, obviously seems to be spinning out of control. And it's a huge resource that multiplies the comfort and the information that local caregivers can provide, and often I think provides a voice that patients feel they can confide in, even sometimes beyond that which they feel comfortable telling their providers. So it just helps patients regain a sense of control at a desperate moment in their lives, and it's simply another example of PanCAN doing good, in the world.
Yep, great, thank you. So one of the services you mentioned that's part of patient services is our Know Your Tumor program. And as you know, PanCAN's always been willing to sort of push the envelope and do things that weren't proven yet. And I think Know Your Tumor is a good example of that. It was a program we launched back in 2014. Back then, it was not understood whether biomarker testing of pancreatic cancer patients would be useful and, would we be able to use that information in a useful way. But PanCAN decided, the only way we're going to learn that is if we do it and we find out. And of course, we've learned that information is useful. So why is this kind of innovation important, and how has it helped to accelerate research efforts?
Yeah, so when we think why haven't pancreatic cancer patients benefited as much as folks with other types of cancer in terms of new therapies and the like, and it's because before PanCAN started work in this space, we treated every pancreatic cancer patient as if they had the same exact disease and gave them essentially one of two different types of traditional chemotherapy. And at the same time, patients with lung cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, and other tumor types were all benefiting from something called biomarker-directed therapy, where patients have the opportunity to have their tumors profiled, and unique molecular features of each individual patient's tumor are identified and used to select therapy in a much more personalized medicine approach. And for a variety of reasons, that wasn't felt to be possible in pancreatic cancer. And PanCAN, admittedly took a bold stand when others thought it wouldn't work and encouraged patients to undergo biomarker testing through the Know Your Tumor, precision personalized medicine service. And so at no charge to the patients, Know Your Tumor provided patients and their healthcare teams, and this was before the FDA would approve this type of testing for pancreatic cancer, but Know Your Tumor provided patients with information about the unique biology of their tumor, what makes their cancer cells different from their healthy cells, and a specific list of treatment options that might benefit that patient, provided both to the patients and to their healthcare teams. And the results were striking. This was work that Lynn Matrisian and others at PanCAN published, and showed that in contrast to what we long thought, in contrast to kind of the standard opinion, actually 1 out of every 4 pancreatic cancer patients does have an actionable alteration, mutation or otherwise, in their tumor, a biologic change that would indicate a certain treatment option may work best for them. And through the first 1,000 patients to undergo this testing, I think we're now up to over 2,000 patients, we learned that patients who are able to go on a therapy that matches their tumor biology live an average of 1 year longer than patients who don't go on matched therapies. And this has led to a whole new paradigm in pancreatic cancer treatment. And now the FDA got on board on the basis of this knowledge and approved genetic sequencing for all pancreatic cancer patients. And this has led to remarkable things, that patients with certain mutations, they happen to be in the genes associated with breast cancer, that are relatively common mutations also in patients with pancreatic cancer. Those patients are so sensitive to certain therapies that many of them are now on maintenance therapy, a pill a day, and living years on maintenance therapy. And it's just a remarkable sea change that all started with Know Your Tumor.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Now the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, the NCCN guidelines, recommend that all patients with pancreatic cancer get biomarker testing. And of course, PanCAN continues to educate patients about that. I can certainly remember, and I'm sure you do too, back in the day when you talked about pancreatic cancer treatment, you needed one slide because we thought of it as a homogeneous disease, you know, and there was one treatment option. And now today, when you go to scientific meetings, that's so changed so drastically. It actually makes it much more complicated, but we can start to really get at how we treat patients individually.
No, that's right. Just because the tumors start in the same organ, and just because they look the same under the microscope, we've learned through Know Your Tumor, they have vastly different genetic alterations that make them sensitive to different therapies.
Yep, great. So as a surgeon, of course, you want more patients to be eligible for surgery, to have their pancreatic cancer tumor removed. And in order to make that happen, we need to be able to diagnose the cancer earlier, before it's metastasized. So PanCAN's just launched our early detection initiative, looking at people who are diagnosed with new onset diabetes after the age of 50, because we know that for some people, this is an early symptom of pancreatic cancer. So can you talk about why this very large scale study is important?
You know, this is bold. This is wonderful, and this, I think, is one of the PanCAN initiatives that has the very highest chances of really, you know, being game changing and life saving. So today, only about a quarter of all pancreatic cancer patients are eligible for surgical resection at diagnosis, and a very small fraction of them have the very earliest stage of the disease, known as stage 1A. When we do stumble essentially upon those patients, often through an X-ray that's ordered for some other reason, a CAT scan or something, those patients, when resected, can have 80% 5-year survival, which is unfortunately compared to only single-digit percentages for those who are diagnosed with already metastatic disease. And pancreatic cancers, again, are unique, and they don't have to get very big before they spread. So this early diagnosis is really an important step towards curing this disease. And there's been lots of studies. When I was at Johns Hopkins, we did a tremendous amount of work looking at people with high genetic risk. And those screening efforts have been productive, but they haven't led to the revolutionary sea change that we hope for, and large numbers of patients being diagnosed at stage 1A. And so now, with the help of expert epidemiologists at multiple cancer centers around the country, PanCAN's looking at another group of people who we've learned have significantly higher rates than normal of pancreatic cancer. And those are patients with new onset diabetes occurring after the age of 50. We know that a measurable fraction of those patients will have early pancreatic cancer associated with their new onset diabetes, likely a cause of the new onset diabetes. And so the early detection initiative, PanCAN's early detection initiative, is focused at looking at a large population of people, I think more than 12,000 people with new onset diabetes, and based on their age, changes in body weight and blood sugar, determine who among them has the highest likelihood of harboring an early pancreatic cancer. And the goal is to develop an early detection strategy to change practice guidelines. And so this is a big new initiative that'll soon start randomizing patients, I think maybe even next month, Julie?
Yeah, that's our hope, by the end of next month.
The other big potential benefit from this is we will never, this initiative is likely to assemble the biggest group of patients ever assembled with stage 1A pancreatic cancer. And it'll give us kind of the earliest glimpse at this disease from which we can even hope to one day develop, prevention strategies by seeing what the disease is like in its earliest inception. We're going to hopefully get clues about how to prevent it altogether. So this is a big, bold new initiative that I think has the potential to be hugely impactful.
Yep, and there's a question in the chat related to this. They're asking, is that just for 1A? So I think just to clarify, the goal of these studies is to be able to identify the pancreatic cancer when it is at what we would call 1A. But Dr. Leach,
that's right. We won't know. It's still likely that the majority of these patients with new onset late life diabetes won't have pancreatic cancer. And one of the goals of the study is to define which ones do. And then we suspect that those folks, by having participated in this program, will have their pancreatic cancer diagnosed earlier than typical, and more likely at an early stage.
And there's another question about how do you find those people? So the idea is that we have to look for groups of people that have a risk factor, and in this case, that risk factor is early new onset diabetes. And so the hope is that we identify the people with new onset diabetes that eventually get the pancreatic cancer, and that's how we identify people with pancreatic cancer at stage 1A.
And this is a hugely sophisticated exercise in epidemiology. And I've learned that my dear epidemiology colleagues, unlike surgeons, still know how to do math. So it's a real sophisticated computational prediction effort.
Yes, great. So obviously we know early detection would be game-changing for changing patient outcomes, but at the other end of the spectrum, we also need better treatment options. So the other big research initiative that PanCAN has recently launched is our big adaptive clinical trial called Precision Promise. This is a new model for testing pancreatic cancer drugs and combinations. And we're working with multiple stakeholders, including the FDA, pharmaceutical companies, and leading clinicians around the country. So can you talk about why is PanCAN in a unique position to be able to do something like this, bring all these stakeholders together that would be hard for anyone else to be able to do?
Yeah, not just hard, Julie, but impossible. So, to me, Precision Promise may be the ultimate example of what only PanCAN can do. So it's a clinical trials consortium involving multiple, the nation's leading cancer centers. That's literally the envy of investigators who work on other tumor types. It has academic institutions clamoring to be included. It has industry partners vying for participation in it. I was on a call with a small number of cancer center directors the other day with Richard Paz chapter at the FDA, and it literally has the FDA kind of evolving its thinking regarding how new, creative, adaptive clinical trial designs, exemplified by Precision Promise, can help accelerate the delivery of new FDA-approved treatments to patients. And so I think Precision Promise now has 15 different participating cancer centers that have all begun enrolling patients, with 5 additional sites slated to soon come on board. And this truly is how we'll, in addition to early detection and biomarker delivered therapy, this is how we'll move the survival needle forward through previously unheard of collaboration between academic institutions, the pharmaceutical industry, and the FDA, that again, only PanCAN has the power to convene. PanCAN is just through its incredible commitment, through its accomplishments, through Julie's energy, and through the energy of our entire community, it's achieved a credibility to convene an ambitious clinical trials consortium like this that no other entity could do. And many of the trials that will, many of the new treatments that will be evaluated in this ambitious clinical trials consortium, will be these new biomarker directed therapies, in addition to new ways to try and bring immunotherapy to benefit our pancreatic cancer patients. And the network of clinicians and scientists and industry partners is going to also use the data to generate new biomarkers. We'll constantly be reevaluating, what treatments work in which patients and what treatments don't. And it's kind of a learning system in oncology. So again, something that only PanCAN can do.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That was a terrific explanation. And, one of the things that has been challenging in the drug development space for pancreatic cancer is, quite frankly, this is a risky drug development space for pharmaceutical companies. The failure rate has been very high over the last 30 years. And so when a company is making a decision, am I going to take this, drug that could target pancreatic cancer or could, target breast cancer, they might choose breast cancer because of the financial investment behind that. So one of the things that PanCAN wants to do with Precision Promise is really de-risk the drug development space by making this a less expensive way for a company to develop drugs. And one of the ways that we're able to do that is by supplementing the funding that pharmaceuticals are providing with donor philanthropy dollars. And so just to educate our audience about why we need funding for Precision Promise, it's really helping us to de-risk the drug development space for pancreatic cancer and accelerate ideas that our scientific and research community feel have great promise for our patients. So PanCAN also believes that collecting data is important. And all these initiatives we're talking about, we're collecting lots of data. We're actually building a platform called Spark that will house a lot of this data. And our goal is to then, make it available to the research community. So can you just talk a little bit, why is data so important? It maybe isn't as exciting of a thing to talk about, but the data is really ultimately what's going to change practice. So why is it important for supporters to fund the infrastructure and the people necessary to use the data in the way that is going to allow us to accelerate progress?
Yeah, well, no, I think it's key in PanCAN's model, and in fact, explicit expectation that participating institutions are going to share data openly. That this expectation for open data sharing is in stark contrast to the approach that many academic institutions are taking of late, which is to kind of cloak intellectual property behind firewalls and limit public consumption and often create barriers, unfortunately, to sharing data. And that's not the way to move science forward. And so funding infrastructure for universal data sharing, it'll literally allow the scientific progress that PanCAN enables to be crowdsourced, right? And it'll multiply by several fold the global scientific workforce that's able to access the data, think about the data, and work, about how to cure pancreatic cancer. It's also just part of the warp and woof, the culture of our pancreatic cancer community is to be collaborative and share data. The challenge is that cancer research data these days has reached terabyte, gigabyte, and beyond proportions as we're generating so much genetic sequencing data that it becomes, again, almost beyond the scope, certainly beyond the scope of any individual lab to house, and often beyond the scope of any individual cancer center to house. So both from a point of view of crowdsourcing and multiplying our pancreatic cancer scientific workforce, from the point of view of being consistent with our culture of sharing, and just from a logistic point of view, data sharing infrastructure becomes key.
Yep, great, thank you. So, as we think ahead, we all want to feel hope and be inspired. If we continue at what we're doing, raising philanthropic dollars, increasing federal resources, what do you think is possible in the future?
Yeah, well, PanCAN has taught me to dream big. As again, somebody, I euphemistically refer to myself as an increasingly senior member of the pancreatic cancer research community, or alternately as someone who's had multiple 59th birthdays. I kind of think of these questions according to, what might happen during my career, meaning in the next decade or less, and then also what might happen during my lifetime. And in the next decade, through the efforts of Know Your Tumor and Precision Promise, I believe that we will no longer be treating patients with generic chemotherapy, but instead every single individual pancreatic cancer patient will have the opportunity to, through Precision Promise, receive an FDA-approved biomarker selected therapy for this disease tailored to their own tumor's unique features. And we will see ongoing doubling of survival, hopefully multiple rounds of doubling survival in the next decade through that kind of advance. And as I mentioned earlier, through the early detection program, I believe that we will begin to see a significant increase in early stage tumors that will be cured by surgery and minimal additional therapy. And in my lifetime, I am confident that through these efforts, we will first turn pancreatic cancer into a disease that people live with rather than die of, that they do get to walk their children down the aisle, they do get to meet their grandchildren, and they do get to live quality lives with pancreatic cancer, and ultimately begin to find ways to prevent it altogether.
I think Julie may have frozen. I'm not quite sure, but let's just continue on. I'll just step in and take over. So that's a wonderful answer, Dr. Leach. I guess you're back. Great.
It wouldn't be a virtual meeting without some sort of internet snafu. I don't know what happened, but sorry about that. But Steve, you were giving an impassioned answer, which I'm sure you finished, and I'm sure it was wonderful. So thank you. So I want to take one more question, or Steve, ask you one more question, and then I know we have a bunch of things in in the chat, and I think I lost the chat when I went off. So my team can help me. Dr. Leach, why do you continue to partner with PanCAN on behalf of pancreatic cancer patients?
Well, it's because I can think of no better way to help our patients, right? Like I've alluded to it earlier, in a complex world, just simply stated, PanCAN is a force for good in the world, for our patients and beyond. And it's one of the institutions that I'm most proud to be associated with, and look forward to continuing to do so as long as I'm in the business.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Leach. And just from me personally, I'm so honored to get to work with you. You've just been an amazing leader and an advisor, and we couldn't do what we do without people like you. So thank you really from the bottom of my heart for everything that you've done for PanCAN over the years. You never say no. I mean, we ask a lot, so I really appreciate it. For when I got cut off, my chat went away, but I remember some of the questions, and my team is sending me over some as well. So there were several questions about community for progress. So maybe Steve, can you, and I can help you, define what is community for progress? There were some questions about what exactly is it? Is it only for people who are PanCAN grantees? Do people really share their information and data when we get together?
Absolutely. And so I think of the community for progress as the only place that I've ever been where junior investigators, senior investigators from all kinds of different scientific disciplines, surgeons, medical oncologists, pathologists, geneticists, epidemiologists, molecular biologists, get together with leaders from the NIH, leaders from the FDA, get together with current patients, survivors, caregivers, advocates, and learn from each other, and especially when you consider all the purple stride components that are built into this. It's a completely open, tent, and with also deep community roots, right? Each one of us brings, from Purple Stride and other activities, our own communities into this. So it's a big open tent, and it's the only place I've ever been able to interact with such a diverse group of people focused on solving a big problem.
Yep, great, thank you. And maybe just to give a little sort of structure to our supporters. So PanCAN, we don't just invest in the grant that we give our grantees. We also invest money in what we call our community for progress. And what that means is we invest money to have an annual scientific meeting where we bring everybody together so that they can report out on their progress. And in particular, the junior investigators can get feedback from the senior investigators. And that really helps, them think about what they're doing in their labs. Collaboration is another thing that we hear from a lot of our grantees, that while the funding, and Dr. Leach actually mentioned this, while the funding is obviously important, it's actually the people that they end up meeting through PanCAN's bringing everyone together that probably has the biggest impact on their careers. We also invest in sending some of our junior investigators to some of the big pancreatic cancer scientific meetings. Like there is an American Association for Cancer Research pancreatic cancer meeting that we usually send our junior investigators to ensure that they have money. Their institutions don't always provide them money to attend those kinds of meetings. And so PanCAN does that. And then while we're there, we bring, those investigators together to meet each other. And I can tell you, so many of our junior investigators, especially over the years, are still partnering and working together on scientific collaborations because they met originally, at a PanCAN meeting. Okay. So, and actually that sort of dovetails into this question, Dr. Leach. Why would someone fund a grant through PanCAN instead of just funding it directly through their institution? What's the benefit?
Well, first of all, institutional funding is much more commonly limited to small pilot grants that might fund work for a year or so, and still then be reliant on eventual funding from the NIH, which typically funds mostly senior investigators. And we always joke that to get a grant from NIH, you have to propose to do what you've already done, because it really funds accomplishment more than kind of bold new ideas. And NIH, hasn't been that friendly to risky, bold, creative ideas. So, in contrast, right, PanCAN is famous for funding, crazy, bold ideas that have led to all these advances that we're talking about, funding innovation, funding, junior investigators, and then allowing folks to be part of a community that allows their science to be accelerated and enabled in ways that, individual work in a siloed individual institution just doesn't allow. So it's by funding innovation, by funding junior folks in addition to senior folks, and by allowing participation in the broader community, that it there's no doubt in cancer research where you'd rather get a grant from your own cancer center. And again, I, as cancer center director at Dartmouth, I give grants like this out all the time. All my faculty would rather have funding from PanCAN.
Well, great. Well, thank you. It's an honor to have that sort of reputation in the research community, that getting a grant from PanCAN is something that they really want to put up high on their resume.
And the other thing I'd say is PanCAN has funded, not just 1 year pilot funding, but made great bets on young investigators, giving them funding starting in their postdoc and then extending into their eventual faculty careers, right? PanCAN funds people and careers, with the hope that they'll commit their scientific lives to this.
Yep. So there's a couple of questions. There's been some exciting news recently about a drug specific to targeting the G12C mutation in KRAS. And of course, I think our supporters know that KRAS is an extremely important target that we have yet to have a drug for pancreatic cancer. But the G12C for pancreatic cancer is not the one that is the most expressed in pancreatic cancer patients. It's only about 1%. So there's just questions, how do we take that learning and knowledge and expand it into pancreatic cancer?
Yeah, so it's, every time there's a new advance in cancer research and therapeutics, it can sometimes seem like pancreatic cancer patients, again, aren't the direct beneficiaries. And that's unfortunately the case with the G12, the KRAS G12C drug. These letters and numbers refer to amino acids at a certain point in the protein. Unfortunately, G12C, as Julie said, is exceedingly uncommon in pancreatic cancer. It's one of the most common mutations in lung cancer. It's G12D and G12V, different amino acid substitutions that are common in pancreatic cancer. And so what we benefit from in the pancreatic cancer community is now the precedent, though, of the approach in knowing how that advance was made. And it's in a field called structural biology, where through understanding the precise crystal structure of the proteins encoded by oncogenes that we can now, in complex computational ways, think about what drug might specifically fit into that pocket on a protein, on KRAS G12D or G12V, in a manner that's going to neutralize it. So the approach is informative. Unfortunately, this specific drug is not going to benefit all but a very, very tiny fraction of pancreatic cancer patients.
And that's certainly an area, where there would be excitement, obviously, is targeting KRAS, that PanCAN will continue to watch and monitor very closely. And anywhere where we can help to fill the gaps or accelerate that research, we absolutely will do that, with the vision that eventually we would have something in precision promise that is targeting KRAS. That would be the ultimate goal. So there were a couple of other questions that Allison Rosenzweig, our scientific communications director, did a great job of answering in the chat. So thank you, Allison. Your answers are terrific. So I'm just going to take one last question and then we'll wrap it up because we're nearing the end of the hour. Someone asked, can someone volunteer for PanCAN's early detection initiative? And I can quickly answer that. The early detection initiative is being, we're enrolling at places where there are a lot of people being diagnosed with diabetes. So like in large healthcare systems. So as an example, our first site that will launch next month is Kaiser in Southern California. And that's because a place like Kaiser, there's high volume of patients. We're actually not looking for cancer patients. We're looking for people who are being diagnosed with diabetes. So this is not something you can necessarily volunteer to participate in unless you happen to, be in one of the health systems where we will have. Dr. Leach, any concluding remarks that you'd like to make?
No, just gratitude that I feel grateful to be part of this community, to be part of the PanCAN community, and grateful to be part of a group of people from around the country, who want to do good in the world and do good for our patients and families by supporting PanCAN.
Yep, great. Thank you, Dr. Leach. Thank you so much for participating today. And thank you to all of you for joining us. We're so excited to share with you what you make possible. You will receive a post-webinar email from us today, and we would really love it if you'd spend a few minutes filling it out. It helps us to continue to make these programs better in the future. And we have recorded this meeting. There were a couple of questions about that. We've definitely recorded this meeting. We will be sending that out in the post email so that you will have the link so you can listen to it again, or you can pass it on to your family and friends. So again, just a tremendous thank you for all of your incredible support this last year and always. I'm deeply, deeply grateful for what you continue to allow us to do. Dr. Leach, thank you again, and I hope everybody has a terrific day. Thanks, everybody.